Welcome,
All right.
welcome. Uh, Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Sir Formscapes. Excited to talk. And yeah, I don't know if there's anywhere I have a bunch of ideas on things we could talk about, questions I want to ask you, inquiries, lines of reasoning I'm hoping to investigate. But I'm also open to whatever and kind of curious to hear what's on your mind. Wonderful video last night. I
Mhm.
already mentioned that I've been enjoying your work, but particularly that one last night really I think really struck a chord, if I may use such language, and I think that it's very exciting in terms of like where I know at the end you kind of said you were like, I'm tempted to, you didn't use the word tempted, but you're like, I almost went on along, about the implications of this. And I think I'm right there with you in terms of, I'm ex excited and curious to kind of dig into those implications and stuff. And, but yeah, if there's anything in particular thinking, or,
Right. So if we look at the whole historical trajectory here of the development of tonal music, um, which is really important here because with modal music, you kind of have the harmonic morphology is kind of one dimensional in the sense that you either have monophonic music or you have polyphonic music that is built around a single center of harmonic gravity, right? So within any kind of modal music, you have really just one note, which is somehow indicated to be the root or the resting point, the home base of what's going on, and so the melodies. You can think of them as kind of a rubber band stretching out that wants to snap back. As you go to more dissonant intervals, it creates tension, and you create these kind of paths going away from and then back to that tonic. So anyway, with tonal music, what happens is you end up creating music with chords where you're basically taking that basic idea and you're like adding another dimension to it so that you have a chord. So a collection of notes is now the center of gravity. And the tritone function comes in here as performing this role in creating resolutions, which will eventually become modulations later on as equal temperament tuning system develops and so forth. And so you have this progression that's going through the development of tonal music, specifically within Western culture. And what's really happening here as we continue to go through this is that tonal music becomes more and more hyperdimensional in character, right? So once we move into um, I really should talk about romantic music too, but let's skip over that. Let's just go straight to jazz. With jazz, what jazz does is it takes that basic idea of tritone resolution, and it starts to really creatively capitalize on the way that chords can be kind of these like Necker cubes, right? Like how you can see it from different angles and it can appear to be popping out or going into the page or whatever, right? Like depending on how you look at it, and you can cause it to flip. You can do that with chords
that's
too.
like that would be like the permutations of the chord, like the minor or seventh of a chord, or like, are you talking actual kind of like in terms of a stylistic sense, like,
So, for example, let's say you have a chord progression like 1 6 4. Okay, this is a very common like chord loop within popular music. You can
okay.
just loop that 1 6 4. So the four goes back to the one. That's a plagal cadence. Okay, so that would be like C, A minor, F, right? So what you can do if you're a jazz guy and you're like, oh, well, let's play with this, you can realize that that A minor, so the second chord in that sequence, can be the six in the key of C, but it can also be the two in the key of G, right? And so you go like C A F C A F C A F, and then C A, and then D 7, D dominant 7, right? And so now suddenly, retroactively, that A minor chord is both the 6 and the 2 at the same time. So it has an Aeolian dimension to it, but now because of that D major chord coming into play at the end there, it's also expressing a kind of Dorian modality as well, because it's the 6 and the 2 at the same time. It's serving as a kind of bridge, and then that D dominant chord can then that's a tritone in there that can then pivot into like a G major for a perfect cadence, or you can do something weirder with it if you want to do a different kind of cadence. And this is basically the basic logic behind jazz, and a lot of classical music as well makes a lot of use of this kind of reasoning, where you're seeing that there's this polydimensionality within the chords, and that you can play with this and you can use it to create music where not only do you have a specific chord designated as a tonic, but now that tonic itself can move around, and you can have these even higher order structures of compositional logic, which encompass changes between numerous different key centers. Um, and so what's going on here, at the very end of that video, I said, the experience of music is not the experience of sound, is not the experience of frequencies, is not the experience of notes. All of those things are just purely surface level vehicles for that which is actually being experienced. What is actually being experienced is morphology, the conceptual noetic contents within the notes are actually what we are experiencing when we listen to music, unless you just happen to have perfect pitch. But again, perfect pitch is not you're not actually hearing. That's not the same as the experience of the music. Like if you can hear a note and be like, that's 440, middle A or whatever it is, like you're hearing the pitch, but even that is not experiencing the music that's actually going on in there. That's a different kind of faculty, which
Hmm.
is why most people do not have perfect pitch, and most people who do have perfect pitch lose it throughout their life, because it's
Yeah,
not
and
very
everyone has.
natural.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's something that has to develop at a very young age, during a very specific window of neuroplasticity, as they say. Basically, what happens is your brain latches on to a very specific memory of a
Oh,
specific
interesting.
frequency, and then it uses that as kind of an anchor to measure other pitches against. And if you don't do that before you're like 6 years old, you'll never do it. You
Dude,
cannot learn
humans are
perfect pitch.
crazy. That's crazy that people can, I don't know, like, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And what comparing it to what you're talking about is much more, sorry if you had more to say there. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, go
Um
ahead.
uh but what you're talking about is, is a natural thing such that everybody debatably, but I think everybody kind of can have this experience of music to varying degrees, right? And an interesting, right? That's and seemingly, at least to my eye, and um, it would kind of imply something of a complexification comes to mind, right? This process of complexification in our ability um, to you know coagulate unities out of increasing levels of multiplicity and stuff, right? So an interesting thought came to mind there. I'm still very much working through the your video and stuff. I don't follow all the terminology still, but one interesting thought that came to mind is thinking about the difference in taste that people have between music, such that some people, it's a very common phrase. I listen to what I like, whatever, I listen to whatever. And I like all types of music because I
No
can,
one ever means that when they say it,
yeah,
ever.
but I think they say it because we all know that it's like that is kind of the goal to be able to cohere this multiplicity such that we can recognize the beautiful unity in all types of music or something like that, right? And uh I don't remember kind of the thoughts that came after that, but it's an interesting idea, right? Where it's like obviously we do like there is something to be said for making a more perfect song, perhaps. But I think it's maybe more so about, you know, being able to like uh embrace or empathically resonate with all songs or something like that. You know? I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, there's a couple of things that are really important in that. So the empathy thing is really important, and the
Yeah.
resonance thing, and also there's this indication of agency within these things, right? So like you said, like people say, I listen to oh, I can like all kinds of music. No, you can't, because your ability to actually cognize the actual depth of that which the music is attempting to articulate is dependent on what you bring to the table. And that's really significant here, because what that's highlighting is it's really pointing us towards what this whole progressive transformation is doing. Our faculty of perceiving the interiority of things has always been there. Our capacity to perceive anything as anything is that kind of pattern recognition. It is that capacity to see through the sensory, the manifest, the notes, the
Gestures.
individual
Gestures,
rays of
perhaps?
light hitting your eyeballs or whatever it is, and into what is preconditioning those sensory perceptions, right? Just to be able to see like the cup as a cup, like if you were just a computer that was literally just going on the sensory information, you wouldn't see a cup. Computers don't see cups unless we very, very meticulously teach them how to identify what cups are, because to them it's just fucking pixels, right?
Mhm.
Like it doesn't make any difference to them. And that's what we would be like if we were really just limited to the sensory, but we're not. We never are. We're always seeing through things. And so you see this within the development of philosophy as well. This is really interesting, right? If you go back to Aristotle, um, Aristotle, when he says he's talking about the conceptual contents of human experience, and he says when you look at a thing, a cup, so there's the substance, where is the form, where's the thought? So the conceptual contents, because again, Aristotle doesn't have a consciousness and then objective matter distinction yet. So for him, the conceptual contents are the thoughts. And so he's like, well, the form is in the thing, and therefore the thought is in the world. He's not thinking of ideas as things that are inside the human skull yet. It's not there, and it takes time. It takes time for that to happen. And what's happening here is a contraction, and interiorization is happening. And we can see this passing through the Renaissance. And we see it passing through John Locke, for example, who says that um, the mind is a blank slate, and that all of its conceptual contents are taken in from the world. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because here's what Locke's saying. Locke's saying, okay, the ideas are in the world and they impress themselves on the mind. So there's this absorption that's happening. And then Hume plays with that. Hume runs into his big problem because he's trying to stay true to this idea of sensorial empiricism, the idea that the sensory impressions are really all we're working with. Because now Hume is not thinking that the ideas are in the world and then getting sucked into the human mind. He's thinking that the ideas are created by the mind through a process of inference about the world. Keep going. Leibniz then comes along and he's like, okay, there's nothing in the intellect that was not first in the senses except the intellect. So the idea of cohesion and selfhood and contradiction, these basic conceptual contents that precondition the capacity to actually take in things from the world have to already be there, right? And so already in Leibniz, you're seeing the basic insight that's going to be the root of what Kant's trying to do with his transcendental idealism, the synthetic a priori as the conceptual contents which are there by definition as simply a condition for the possibility of experience itself. Okay. So again, you can imagine as this gradual sucking in of the conceptual contents of the world into the human intellect. Okay. So now, what's happening now is when we look at this let's compare that now with what's going on with music. With music, this multidimensionality that's opening up within music is showing us the way that our own cognitive faculties are kind of casting a light on the objects of experience so as to reveal the conceptual contents within them. And moreover, the manifestation of those conceptual contents is not fixed. It's not determinate. There's a multidimensionality here. It can be seen in numerous different ways because the actual forms within things are not just these rigid, static, crystalline, Platonic mathematical objects. They have this amorphousness to them, but at the same time, they're not just blobs either. They're somehow both. There's a range of possibilities contained within those kind of morphological contents, and it's that indeterminacy which is really important here, because that's the way in which the morphological, the noetic, is able to then condition the sensory, because all of the possible sensory manifestations are kind of contained in that implicitly within the morphological, right? So this is David Bohm. This is the implicate order. This is what I've called the pleroma. There's this darkness, and it's within the world of light, as it were. There's an indeterminacy, that is to say, a formlessness, and by coming to an awareness of that formlessness, that capacity for pattern recognition, for seeing the conceptual within the sensory, is now becoming something that's not just happening automatically in this kind of bodily way. Because again, let's go back to Aristotle. Clearly, that's what Aristotle thought was going on. It didn't occur to him at all that maybe the cupness of the cup was dependent on Aristotle in some kind of way. It was just there in the world for him. But now we can see that, like, there are many, many different ways that these things could appear to us. We're seeing that we do have a kind of agency in our capacity to see into things, and so we can see deeper into things. We can see more of that depth, more of that possibility space by kind of taking the wheel, as it were, so that this is no longer just a kind of bodily function in the way that our heartbeat is. It's something that we're actually able to actively do. And that thing that we are doing when we do this is that empathic resonance. We have a bad habit of thinking of empathy as though it's just some kind of like feeling that happens to us. And it's absolutely not. It is an epistemological faculty. And that's what's important here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the word communion comes to mind as well, like kind of communing. It's interesting to think about like communing with the possibility space of, I don't know, like maybe that's what really adds the depth when when two people are really meeting each other. It's that they are able to they are coming into alignment with kind of the potential of that person or something like that. It's like all the possible people that they could be in some way or something.
You can see it as kind of a crossing of boundaries in a way. If you think of the physical as kind of like the outermost shell within that the noetic or spiritual or whatever you want to call it is kind of contained within, then this empathy it's a capacity to it is resonance in a way, like the way that mercury, for example, had this immense significance within medieval alchemy, because it's like the more subtle form of silver. Silver is reflective. It was used in mirrors and that kind of thing. And so there's this correspondence then with the moon, the archetype of the moon as something which reflects. But Mercury is like the more etheric form of that. That's how they were thinking of it. Mercury as really the intellectual faculties, as it were, which are able to reshape themselves, right? So Mercury doesn't just reflect, it's also a liquid. It changes form depending on its container,
Yeah.
right? And so you can think of the human mind like that as well. When we're doing this kind of resonance with other people or with music or with uh, really anything,
Nature. Yeah.
any perception of the world involves this on some way or another. There is our mind is resonating with the interiority of things. It's taking the shape of that interiority, and the more that we become cognizant of the fact that that's what's going on, the more that we have a capacity to take that and refine that, not just as a function but as an ability.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, as I said, I'm still kind of working on some of the pieces and stuff, and there's parts in my mind that I'm still struggling with regard to maybe it's just my modern sensibilities, but like this idea that um seeing the numinal you or something is, let's say that in the etheric or the astral aspect of you, that there's like a particular pattern going on. um like I still conceive of that in my mind for some reason as like there is kind of an objective pattern, but it's like a higher level objective pattern that you still have to see through this kind of imaginative empathic resonance. Like the way that Steiner would talk about it was that like you could see somebody like luciferic spirits kind of shining through somebody in a sense, or like other types of spirits, or my mind goes to the planetary systems where like you can see that somebody is acting out like a particular conjunction that's happening because they're not intentionally relating to it or something like that. That's very interesting to me. Mars coming into Cancer in a couple minutes here. Okay, so I'm still trying to figure out that like how that relates to this multidimensionality aspect of it. Maybe you could help me out a bit there. But then the last thing was kind of I'm hoping to shift towards like how we it's you've been talking a lot about how we look into things, and I think it's amazing. As I've said, I also find it interesting, like uh if somebody's looking at us, how can we maybe be more available to that sort of communion, empathic resonance. And like how does in your you ended one of your videos like turning around the telescope to see how we embody these types of levels or these shells, like these external internal shells and stuff. But anyway, kind of lots of stuff of you there, so like if there's any, I don't know, what about, yeah, either of those two, feel free to go whichever way you wish.
Pause for one moment. The idea here is there's a huge range of different things that I could do. I'm going to change my audio back over. There's a huge range of different things that I could do within that kind of field of possibility. Right. And you see this when musicians improvise, right? So a lot of times within like well, many different genres of music, you'll have just a series of chords, and the musicians will just look at that. They'll know the tempo, and there's a dozen different ways that you can play that chord. There's a number of different ways you could express that musical idea, because the conceptual contents themselves are kind of amorphous in a sense. You could, for example, if it's like a C major chord, and so you've got this like 1 2 5 progression or whatever, you could play just like a pentatonic scale on that C major, and all of those notes would work. They would be expressions of that chord.
Okay, yeah.
If you're playing it in that way, you could play it an inverted version of that
Gotcha.
chord. You could remove certain notes. There's all kinds of different things you can do, and all of those would be expressions of the same idea, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that these conceptual contents are lacking specificity in a way. They have a shape. There are certain things that aren't going to work. There are certain things that are not going to be expressions of that conceptual content, but there's a whole bunch of things that could be. And so what it means then is you've got this very high level of generality there. It's a very encompassing generality. And so maybe what you could say here is that that idea, so I was trying to fiddle around with a Lydian scale there. That Lydian is not really a collection of notes. It's not even really a collection of intervals. I mean, the more you try and define it, the more amorphous it becomes, because really it's just an emotional quality. And so this is why I've been trying to bring in like the planetary archetypes here and use them as a way of kind of nailing down like exactly what that emotional texture
Yeah.
amounts to, and how different kinds of musical expressions can articulate that underlying morphology,
Beautiful. That
right?
was
And
very,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
That's very helpful. Yeah. Uh, yeah, that's beautiful. Um, I love the mapping to astrology. I'm so excited about it. But the yeah, so thinking about the human, so maybe like again using the terminology of like a luciferic spirit or something, you could almost think about like the luciferic as like this hyperdimensional like it is kind of an amorphous like such that the luciferic can have many expressions, right? Or like maybe the Mars uh pattern, like there can be many expressions of Mars. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Like and if we're talking about like I'm thinking again about the etheric astral eye. So I don't know if that maps perfectly, but like such that when I look at somebody, maybe I could see like um in terms of the astral, I always go to the idea of the birth chart insofar as like the birth chart is kind of like this um multifaceted um uh it can be looked at from many angles and it can have many interrelations with the current transits, right? Like it can be you can dance with your birth chart better or worse in every particular moment or something in relation to the world. And then so that's that. But then in terms of the I, maybe it would be something like like you or that bass, that fundamental note in the chord, like the real I or something, right? But then and like that's what we can always return to. But there's all these various permutations of that and chords that we see somebody or like you know, but then ultimately there's kind of that
guardian angel.
It's our givenness and our name, who we truly are, Christ in me.
fundamental note which is playing always or something. Is that tracking? Um,
Right. And so for like Mars, for example, you have to be very subtle with how you describe these things, because of just how multidimensional they are. What Mars is within one person's natal chart, or at any given moment in time, in relation to that person, it can be a huge number of different
yeah,
things, because at the bottom, it is the principle of action, and thus the principle of transformation, and also the principle of masculinity, but then so is Jupiter. And so, I mean, you can just unfold this and unfold it and unfold it forever if you want to, in order to really see all of the different expressions and where they are. And so, yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally the same thing, because when we're looking at the planetary realm, I think what we're really looking at is the astral. I think the zodiac is more etheric, I would say, but of course these things are also interlocking. You can think of it, and this is maybe a little bit more inside baseball, but the way I've been thinking of this is you get these extra layers that kind of develop on the way down as the world kind of unfolds from the cosmic egg, as we might say, where you're beginning with the most fundamental principles of light and darkness and expansion and contraction and synthesis and annihilation, and then you unfold those into this kind of chromatic spectrum. And then you take that spectrum and you start organizing the different colors in that spectrum into these kind of cyclical patterns, and then that is the solar system. It organizes itself into two interlocking whole tone scales. The whole tone scale, much like the augmented chord and tritone, exhibits a symmetry, which thus generates a highly liminal morphology. The scale feels as though it is lost in a fog or dream. There are exactly two whole tone scales, and due to the fundamentally liminal nature of the whole tone morphology, there is no phenomenological difference between them. This underlying symmetry and consequent ambiguity is of immense significance, as we can see this same pattern at work within the celestial realm. Of our two whole tone scales, we can see that one correlates with the luminaries and outer planets, while the other correlates with the inner planets as well as the principles of light and darkness, day and night. The physical body of our solar system can thus be seen as structured by the geometric interlocking of the two distinct whole tone scales. For some reason, which I think is because of the symmetry of it, but in any case. And so it's like the astral, I would say, is primarily just the planetary archetypes. And then at the etheric level, you've got the planetary interacting and within these kind of oscillatory patterns, and then that gives rise to the zodiac, because the zodiac is also a kind of spectrum of light to darkness, going from the moon and sun all the way around to Saturn at the end, at the point of highest darkness, right? And so you've got this inhalation and exhalation that's being applied to a spectrum that itself unfolded from this kind of another kind of yin-yang duality. So anyway, you get this thing where it's like you have the psychical or the soul or whatever, and then from there it becomes the astral and then the etheric, and there's this kind of complexification that's happening on the way down. Anyway, and so yeah, when we're looking at these, we are seeing how they can be expressed in the different organizational principles of the human organism. So we can see Jupiter within a person's etheric body, right? If you know how to look for it, if you know how to read their chart, and you understand how that expresses itself within one's personality.
That's interesting. You know, I've always kind of connected the constellations. I would imagine them being like above, you know, in some way, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, what I've been thinking is this. So so there's this whole kind of like debate thing between like the tropical zodiac and the sidereal, right?
What you're talking about is is what we call the sidereal astrology rather than tropical, right?
Exactly.
Right. So
yes.
it's different. It's more scientific in a way, right?
Well, it is the original.
It's where things actually are.
Yes, yes, where things actually are. So, just to give an example, so the Babylonians were stargazers. They looked up at the stars, and they distinguished what they call the moving stars. The Greek word planet actually is a translation from the Babylonian and means moving star. And so this they distinguish from the background of the fixed stars, which are the stars we see when we look up at the constellations of the zodiac. And so for example, right now you can see, when you look up in the morning, early morning, while it's still dark, you can see Mars having just left the constellation of Taurus, and so it's just past the horns of the bull, has just entered the constellation of Gemini. And a few weeks ago, Mars was in conjunction with the star Aldebaran, which is the brightest star in the constellation of Taurus, is the central star, which we refer to as the bull's eye. And for the Babylonians, the bull's eye marks 15 degrees of the sign of Taurus. So for them, if they saw then Mars in conjunction with Aldebaran, they would record Mars is at 15 degrees of Taurus. So this is how, through their stargazing, they were able to locate the positions of the planets. Now, just that is what, as you referred to, the sidereal zodiac, sidereal meaning of the stars. It's the zodiac based on the stars. Whereas modern Western astrology, by and large, is based on what is referred to as the tropical zodiac, which is the location of the vernal point on the day of the spring equinox as the starting point, 0 degrees of Aries. But if you consider the zodiacal ages, so by definition, or in the tropical zodiac, the vernal point is always at 0 degrees of Aries. But in the sidereal zodiac, the vernal point moves. And so if we go back in time to, let's say, the time of the building of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, around 2,500 years before Christ, at that time, one would have said the vernal point is in Taurus. And then around about the time of the birth of Abraham, shortly after the year 2000 before Christ, that was when the vernal point entered Aries. And as we know, Abraham effectively introduced the age of the ram, with the slaying of the ram in place of his son Isaac. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness that's right.
For Isaac in particular, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we associate Abraham with the start of the age of Aries. And near the end of the age of Aries, of course, this whole age of Aries was preparing, in terms of the genealogy of the children of Israel, was preparing for the coming of the Messiah, who is referred to then in the book of Revelation and also by John the Baptist as the Lamb. Behold, the Lamb of God. This is we could say, the higher aspect of Aries, going from the ram to the lamb.
Interesting.
And the tropical is standard, and the sidereal people will say, no, you gotta shift it because of the precession and yada yada. And then the tropical people will say, no, it's actually the solstices and equinoxes that really matters, because it's the relationship between the earth and the sun that's more fundamental, and the background of fixed stars is not really the thing that's most relevant here. And what's occurred to me, because it looks to me like the zodiacal should be like a step down from the astral as you're kind of unfolding this. But you do have this thing where it seems like the planets are more interior, and then the stars are like outside of them, right? So what's occurred to me is maybe what's going on here is with the tropical zodiac actually is kind of inside of the planetary spheres, because it's actually the annular seasonal cycles of the Earth that is really the dominant thing there.
Hmm.
And maybe the kind of missing link here would be a third zodiac. So you would have the houses, and then you would have the tropical zodiac, and then you would have actually a completely different third zodiac with 12 completely separate signs, which would actually correspond to the sidereal procession. And it's occurred to me that maybe, and this is just an idea I've been toying around with, I have not fully fleshed this out by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe you could have something like where the constellations Ophiuchus and Orion could have a similar polarity as like Leo and Aquarius within the tropical zodiac. And so then you would have kind of like three that are kind of nested within one another.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm having
so I
trouble.
don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm having trouble visualizing that last part with the fucus and stuff. But I really, something about that, what you're getting at there, really rings very true or correct and on the right track at least. Especially in terms of like people are, lots of people are very excited about the age of Aquarius and such, and I think it's there is kind of, one might think that the tropical sidereal debate throws a monkey wrench into this, but perhaps that's actually like the thing that will catalyze the shift into, like when we realize how to relate to the zodiac or something, like how to bridge these two, such that they obviously, like, there's maybe it's not such a hard line or something. That's very interesting. I encourage you to keep kind of following that thread. Maybe
I'm low-key hoping that I'm just gonna like keep on casually mentioning that idea until someone who knows way more about astrology
Yeah.
than me picks up on it, because the amount of research you would actually have to do to really flesh that idea is just
oh my gosh, yeah.
like you would have to be going back through history and looking at all these different constellations, and
Yeah.
like that would
That's
be
true.
a
Yeah.
monumental task.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Very
but who knows?
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think I kind of follow in a sense what you're saying about the levels as well. Interesting there. Um Also in terms of Steiner talking about the inside out. Or actually I guess that would be the other way around. Such that um I don't know though.
Yeah, there's also this kind of inside out thing going on that's worth taking into consideration too. So this is a thing that Steiner says. He always says that the human being is turned inside out.
Mhm.
And this is a really interesting thing because what he's talking about. So I said that you can think of the physical as kind of like the outermost surface of the spiritual or noetic or whatever you want to call it. And if you start looking at it that way, then you can start to see what Steiner means by saying that we're inside out, right? Because the etheric encompasses the body in a sense, and then the astral is that which kind of like takes bodies and moves them around.
Yeah,
It's the
so
impulses and
interesting.
desires. Hmm?
Sorry.
So the astral is bigger than the physical, but it's also inside the physical in the sense that it's more to the core. It's more inward. It's deeper into consciousness, we could say. And so maybe there's something like that going on within the celestial as well, where you've got this kind of inside outness going on with the zodiac and the planets or the earth or whatnot.
Hmm.
Not entirely sure yet.
Yeah.
These are ideas that I'm still kind of
Yeah.
finagling, but
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the
Yeah.
lines I'm thinking on anyway.
Yeah, I'm not in any camp either, but yeah, as I said, I encourage you to keep thinking about it and stuff. One more thing about this before I'm hoping to talk a little bit about eurythmy and stuff.
Mm.